Okay. Oh, yep, we're on. I walked in the door this morning. Pastor had so much energy, I was afraid that he was going to ask me to preach or something. Then I thought he was going to take over Sunday school, or just preach through Sunday school.
You sang out long this morning.
Nope. But we will try to, I assume with the potluck here, that we'll try to cut a little early today and make sure we have time to move on with that. So we're in Hebrews 12, and we're going to be looking at the paragraph verses 12 through 17 today, and this is quite doable in the time that we have allotted. We are nearing the end of chapter 12, and in fact, the end of chapter 12, verses 18 through 29 is kind of one unit. We'll probably take that as a whole. And then chapter 13 is also going to go quickly. So when I started attending here last year, Pastor was finishing up a Sunday school series, and then the week before he started a new series, he said, "What should we do?" I'm not so well versed as Pastor is, so if you have ideas for what the next Sunday school lesson should be, start bringing those up. Tell Pastor, tell me if Pastor has ideas of what he wants to do next, because I need more time. No, part of it is we're thinking about moving, and therefore I'm with my wife actually would like to start packing up books. Actually, she would like to give all my books away, let's be honest. But I would like to pack them up before she gives them away. And if I want to leave some books out, I just want to kind of know which books I should leave out before they disappear without me noticing. We are seriously looking at moving closer to Marshall. And so we're thinking about that as we look at our house and the things we would have to move. I bought a book last week, and she's like, "Why did you buy another book? We have to move it." Like, it's just one book. Yeah, you say that now. But how many books are you going to buy between now and next spring? You know, like, okay. Good point. But anyway,
it's not going to stop you from buying more books.
Not likely.
Completely.
Not completely. Yeah, so we'll look into that. But anyway, I was thinking about it, and I thought, well, it'll probably be a couple weeks before we finish Hebrews, but if you do have ideas, we can start thinking about that. All right, so Hebrews chapter 12, beginning in verse 12. So the author of Hebrews says, "Therefore lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. Strive for peace with everyone, and for the holiness without which no one will see the Lord." Verse 15, "See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled. That no one is sexually immoral or unholy like Esau, who sold his birthright for a single meal. For you know that afterward, when he desired to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no chance to repent, though he sought it with tears." So this is the section we want to look at today. Now, so it's been a couple weeks. Pastor taught last Sunday because we were gone. We were in Winona. I'm guessing that that was a good Sunday school lesson. I didn't watch it, but I should probably try to do that if it was recorded. And find out what he said. But before that, so 2 weeks ago, we talked about the paragraph before, which talks about discipline. And I was making the argument that we often read, or it can be read, that sometimes people read that paragraph as discipline being a correction. especially because of the quotation up above from Proverbs chapter 3 that includes things like, don't be weary when you're reproved by the Lord chastises every son whom he receives. But it also talks about discipline in those verses. Don't take lightly the discipline of the Lord, and the Lord disciplines whom he loves. And then verses 7 through 11 focuses only on discipline, not correction. And the word there for discipline that's translated throughout that passage is the idea of training for an event. It's preparing yourself for what is coming up. Sharon's son Leighton has visited here on a couple of occasions. He's finishing up boot camp for the Marines out in California. And what is he doing? He's preparing, right, for the next step, whatever that may be. It's all preparation for what's coming up. Is it hard work? Yes. Is it painful sometimes? Yes. Does it take discipline? Yes. Okay, are you tired? Yes. Okay, all of those things are true, but you're preparing yourself for what's coming next, and what's coming next in the context of chapter 12 is either trials or temptations. Trials, persecutions, because they were believers, or perhaps even temptations that they might face in their Christian life. So again, chapter 11 is an encouraging chapter that comes into chapter 12 to encourage the believers to continue on. And so 12 kind of picks up from chapter 10 in that regard. So in chapter 12, or chapter 12, verse 12, once we get to this paragraph, he's building off of that idea of discipline. And here is one of those conversations that happens a lot in the world today. So what's the difference between motivation and discipline? Pastor?
I think you need to clarify, because self-discipline and discipline imposed are two different things.
Okay, self-discipline would be discipline that I'm imposing on myself.
That's close to motivation.
And it's close to motivation, but I could be motivated by someone outside of me, and that would be not self-discipline. It could be discipline that someone else is imposing. Are you saying that motivation?
I'm not saying anything. I'm just asking a specific question.
Okay. All right. So if I have okay, let's use the phrase self-discipline. What's the difference between self-discipline and motivation? Does that clarify?
Quite often parallel, that you're self-disciplining yourself because of your motivation.
Okay.
For the outcome, always certain something.
Okay, so the motivation can be the outcome. I want this certain thing that motivates me. Therefore, I discipline myself in a certain way so that I can attain it. So I use the analogy, I ran the mile in high school, and you set a goal for running the mile in a certain amount of time. Okay, so that's my motivation to doing that. Might be, personal record, could be to win a race. I never did that. It could be what? To have the pain stop. And so I'm going to discipline myself because there's something at the end of the day that I want to gain. Okay, so motivation is often something that's outside of us that draws our attention to it. If I want to have that, then I need to do this, and whatever this is, I have to discipline myself. So if I want to graduate debt-free from college, I need to discipline my finances. Right, so I don't go, I don't waste my money. I don't, take out loans. I may or may not, but the loans will be paid off by the time I'm done with college. Okay, so there's certain disciplines I'm going to do. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to work extra in the summertime to make money and stick it in a bank. I might take time off of school and work so that, again, I can put money in the bank before I go to school so I can stretch that out. Okay, so if my goal is to graduate debt-free, I discipline my actions now. Okay, and they are very much intertwined. And there are some that would say, if you need motivation to be disciplined, you can walk away at any moment because the motivation isn't strong enough. And there are some that say, just self-discipline is all you need, because if that motivation goes away, are you going to quit? Okay, so that's kind of the debate. But anyway, they are very close. They're in practical everyday life, they're very close. Okay, so in chapter 12, and in verse 12, he's continuing on with the previous paragraph, and he says, lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. Okay, so in the continuing on with the metaphor of the Christian life, sometimes we could get beat up, so to speak. Our arms can get tired. We have drooping hands. Your knees get weak. It's hard to keep going. Okay, whether you're running or whatever you're doing, it's hard to keep moving. The idea of making paths straight for your feet is the idea of removing obstacles so that you can focus on the task at hand. So that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. So you've twisted your ankle or you sprained your ankle, and now you're lame. So what's the goal? The goal of being lame, if you've injured yourself in a sport, what's the goal after you've injured yourself? Recovery. Rehab. This is something I hear from young people. Well, I hurt my leg, I hurt my knee, so I can't play football. So now I can't do anything. Well, no. You can do push-ups, you can do pull-ups, you can do one-leg squats, there's other things you can do. You don't just give up on life because you hurt your leg. What's your goal? Your goal is to get back. Well, keep what you can, granted, and then once you're able to start working on that leg, work on that leg, right? You're trying to strengthen it back up, get back where you were. There's a lot that you can do there. So in the Christian life, the discipline that God works through us in the previous paragraph is supposed to encourage us to discipline ourselves, to have that self-discipline. And what is the last fruit of the Spirit? Discipline, right? Self-control. That is the fruit of the Spirit. So the Spirit works in us to have self-discipline, but this is what he's talking about here. We have to have self-discipline in those moments when we're tired, when we don't want to go on, when we're weak, when it feels like, those moments where it feels like going on could be the worst possible thing for us. Moving forward seems to be painful in life. But what he's arguing here is, no, we have self-discipline. God helps us, the Holy Spirit helps us, but there's something that we need to do for ourselves in our Christian life to prepare ourselves for those trials and temptations to come. There is something that we have to do. There's a burden that falls on us to prepare for that. So we don't know what those trials are going to be. We don't know when they're going to come. We don't know how they're going to come. So what do? We train. As Christians, we train ourselves spiritually. We strive after spiritual maturity, like even Proverbs states. So that's what he's after here in verses 12 and 13. When those temptations come, we don't want to be weak. Because when we're weak, when those temptations come, that's when we fall. It's easy for us, sometimes, you know yourself, right? I guess you should kind of, an idea of knowing yourself. But it's kind of like traveling. You ever go on a long trip? like a really long trip. Like not to Granite Falls, but, you know, like you're flying, well, think about the Goblershes, you know, they're flying to Hawaii. Now that used to be a 10-hour flight. I don't know if it still is. But that's a long trip. I've traveled to Papua New Guinea, which is almost 24 hours in the air, not counting layovers. That's a long trip. When you're really tired, you're off your schedule, you can't hear much anymore because of airplane noise has numbed your ears, you might even be hungry, could even be thirsty, and your wife says, can you pass me, you know, something? And then what happens? It's like she's just asked you to fly to the moon and back. Like what? How could you possibly want a bottle of water right now? You know, why? Because physically, we're so worn down, it affects us spiritually, and it wears us down. So if you know that that happens or can happen to you, what do? You prepare ahead of time, right? One, that you're not going to respond in a sinful way to your spouse or some other family member or the person just sitting next to you. You know, no, you cannot throw their child out the window while the plane is at 30,000 feet. That's not a, you know, it's not a solution to this problem. You have to work ahead of time before you get into that moment, knowing that, hey, we're going to be on a long trip. You know what happens on a long trip? It's possible for us to have a short temper. Is there something we can do to break up the trip? Is there something we can do to check one another? You know, sometimes, you know, marriage counseling, you know, you need a symbol, right? Like, time out. Like, something, a hand gesture. One of my coworkers said her hand gesture is this. If she ever does that to me, I know that I just need to back away for a minute, okay? I said, hey, that's fine. That communicates really well. Because, you know, you have to put something in place. You have to train yourself for it so that we don't give in to those sins. But then we have to prepare for those things when they come so that we can handle them. And this is what the Christian life is a disciplined life. It's a life of training. It's a life of spiritual training. So that we try to avoid, we can't because we live in a sinful world, but we try to avoid these moments of weakness. So verse 12 and 13. So verse 14 is also a positive statement. So verse 13 is a positive statement. Verse 14 is a positive statement. Strive for peace with everyone and strive for holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. So the idea of striving for peace with everyone, again, is something that I'm responsible for. So if I can point this out again, taking responsibility for our Christian life is my responsibility. Now, we know from the New Testament that we need one another. Okay, being a Christian in a place where there aren't other Christians is not a good thing. It's not the way God has intended it. But I am responsible for training myself, and I am responsible for striving for peace with everyone. Now, you'll notice that it says striving for peace with everyone, trying to be at peace with everyone. Because you will find yourself in circumstances where there are people who don't want to be at peace with you. And the more the world seems to get insane, the harder this seems to be in our world today. Striving for peace with everyone is not the idea of rolling over either. It's not the idea of whatever that person wants, I'll just give them and then we'll be at peace. Okay, that's not what we're talking about with at peace here. This Old Testament idea of peace isn't the absence of war. Okay, it really is the sense of fellowship. What do we fellowship around? What do we work together around? And so this is something that we are trying to do. Now, this means for the Christians, this means that we have to usually, 1, be humble, 2, be gracious, and 3, be forgiving of other people. And these can be hard things. Humility, of course, you can read my book on it. Humility, of course, is obviously not natural to us, right? To give other people the benefit of the doubt, to give other people the chance to speak, to think that perhaps you might be wrong, that can be difficult sometimes. Going into a conversation thinking you might be wrong. And this happens so often. And just to use work again as an example. So one of my coworkers gets an email from someone, and it's one of these things. A student told this faculty member that this other faculty member told this student that this student was supposed to do this thing, and it was the wrong thing, and now we're saying, hey, there's a problem, and we need to fix this, and they're saying, well, that's our fault, because, you know, all this. And so my coworker, you can see how messy this gets, my coworker is like, well, why did this faculty member tell this person the wrong thing? So she sends an email to the faculty member, why did you tell this student the wrong thing? What did the faculty member say?
I didn't say that.
I didn't say that. That's not what I told them. I didn't have a conversation with them. Oh, okay. That's not how we create an atmosphere of peace, right? Peace would be, hey, here's the situation. Can you fill me in on what happened from your side of the story? Okay, and then the person has a chance to talk for themselves, and you go, oh, you didn't actually say that, you said this, and the miscommunication was the student took it that way. Miscommunication was the problem. No one did something that you told them not to do before, and they, did it anyway. Striving for peace with everyone is an attitude of the way we talk to people, and being gracious towards people that sometimes people don't know everything or aren't as advanced as we are. And we don't put them down for that, but we strive to have that peace with them. Now, within the church, of course, this should go without saying, that we should be striving for peace with everyone in the church. But there, too, is a sense of humility and graciousness with other people. But I'm accountable for that. And I can do my part. Oh, one last piece about this idea, that was a bad word. One last thought about this idea of peace is not escalating situations. It's really easy to react to situations and then escalate them. It's really easy well, that person said this, so now I'm going to say that. And I'll confess, I'll confess my own mistake on this one, but Thursday morning, 8 o'clock and 11 seconds after, we get a phone call from a student who is just mad. And that's exactly how she starts her conversation on the phone. Hello, thank you for calling registration. This is Eric. How may I help you? And I was just mowed down. And so that just kind of sets you off, right? This woman just takes it right out at me. And then she's like, and when I tried to just recover from that, she's like, just transfer me to someone who knows what they're doing. Okay, well, I'm the boss, all right? So it was really hard, and I caught myself, actually, starting to react and escalate the situation. So what is it that you did wrong? That's what I asked her. That wasn't the right response. So I corrected that. And by the end of the conversation, she hadn't calmed down, but she was at least somewhat, said she was sorry for the way she had reacted, but her tone of voice hadn't changed at all. But anyway, it's hard in those moments to strive for peace with everyone when they come in with guns blazing and fists flying. But hence we train ourselves so that we are prepared for that. So don't escalate those situations. But it is getting difficult. Now, another practical application of this, it's part of humility is being able to have a conversation with someone when you disagree on the topic. So there used to be a time when my brother and I could talk politics. My brother's a Democrat. I'm a conservative. So what happens? We talk about what are the key issues. We talk about the questions. We talk about the issues in society. We agree on what the problems are. Okay, so now it comes to solutions. Well, what's the solution? And we could have conversations about what's the better solution. Very civil conversations. It was not an issue. And this is something we try to teach our children growing up, how to have a conversation with someone that you disagree with on the answer to the question. But this is today taboo. You're not allowed to do this anymore, but in our society. But it's something that we need to be able to do, and we should be able to do it within the church even. Be able to have conversations with people that we disagree with. Okay, so we're striving for peace with everyone and for holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. So again, this is something that I'm responsible for. I am to strive for holiness. And this, of course, is what the book has been about. But he says it's a holiness without which no one will see the Lord. And this is the practical holiness that has been throughout the book. So I won't spend a lot of time on this one, but throughout this book, there has been the focus on our Christian life, and that our holiness, our righteousness in this life, not the righteousness we have from Christ for salvation, but the holiness with which we live in this world is something that, again, we have to strive after. It doesn't mean that it's our way of salvation, but it's the way we're supposed to live. And in Hebrews 6, you remember that living the Christian life and falling off the path, okay, falling down aside the path of righteousness, is one of those dangers. And one of those dangers is what's going to happen to those believers who give up, so to speak, in their Christian life, in the midst of their Christian life. And he never answers that question, but he says, don't do it. And that's what he's encouraging us on here. So I am responsible to train myself, to discipline myself in the Christian life, verses 12 and 13. I'm responsible to strive for peace with everyone and to strive for holiness in this world, in this life. Okay, those are my responsibilities. Now, verse 15 starts three negatives. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up that causes trouble, and by it many become defiled. So, and then he's going to talk about Esau in verses 16 and 17. So see to it that no one fails to obtain to the grace of God. So that, again, that obtaining to the grace of God is continuing on in that Christian life and striving after holiness. So I have a personal responsibility to make sure that others, namely those other believers around me, that none of them fails. So I have a personal responsibility to discipline myself in my spiritual life. But if I don't do that, if I fail to do that, then believers around me have a personal responsibility to check me, okay, to find out if there's a problem, what needs to be done, to encourage me along in the Christian life, which we saw earlier in chapter 10, verse 26. We have a responsibility to one another, then. I can't make you disciplined. I might not even be able to motivate you. Pastor tries to motivate us from the pulpit. I mean, he does. You do. To motivate us by the Word of God from the pulpit, but there is a sense in which, so I can't be disciplined for you. I can't live your Christian life for you. I'm not a watchdog to make sure you live your Christian life. What I am supposed to do, though, is encourage you along the path. That's my responsibility, is to encourage you along the path. And you likewise have that responsibility to one another. So he says, see to it that no one fails to attain to the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled. Now, the root of bitterness in my ESV is in quotation marks. And there are two ways of taking the root of bitterness. One is to translate it as a bitter root. And some commentators think that maybe it's referring to some of the Old Testament stories about the bitter root and the place that physically it caused problems for Israel. For example, as soon as they left Egypt, they came to a pool of water, and it was bitter. It was undrinkable. Right? There's that story in Exodus, and there's some other stories in the Old Testament about that. It's often, and probably more likely, to take it as a sin that is actually causing trouble in our own hearts, and the sin of bitterness. Which usually is fueled by, ingratitude and kind of a woe is me-ism. When pride takes over in our lives, we focus on ourselves. Everything becomes around us. The sun rises and sets around us. And this is one way you can tell that some people are struggling in their spiritual life, is it really is what they talk about. And when everything is about them, and how, sometimes how terrible their life is, usually how terrible their life is, and you even try to squeeze in a little bit of, but isn't it great when this happens, or weren't you blessed by that? And you even try to encourage them by sliding in one of those in between the pauses, and you get something back like, well, not really, or, well, that, was for that person, or it didn't really affect me any, because, pastor doesn't really know my circumstance, or, and then all of a sudden it gets dismissed, right? There's no good thing in the world. And this root of bitterness can spring up, and it's very hard once it takes hold. It causes trouble in a person's life, and it's hard to rid it out of a person's life because of the way it takes over. It takes over their thinking, and it drags them aside. So using it, kind of a Pilgrim's Progress type illustration, the Christian is walking along the path, and it's almost like a vine has out in the path, and it's wrapped itself around the ankle of Christian, and he gets pulled into the side, out off the path. And he can't get back out. He can't free himself from that weed that has bound him.